With Enshrouded coming just around the corner in a couple days, a lot of people are wondering how big this game is going to be and what is the potential. Will Enshrouded be able to be bigger than Valheim, or will it be a flop that dies off really fast? Is the release of Pow World coming out recently and absolutely blowing up to 1.5 million players? Is that going to hurt the timing of Enshrouded coming out? There's lots of different metrics that we can look at while we're discussing questions like this, and that's what this video is going to be. Let's get into it. Okay, so as we pull up the Valheim player data here, we can see that the player base is about 30 or 40,000 people right now that are still playing the game and logging into Valheim as a reliable daily player base. The all-time peak is 500,000 players here at just over 498. But not every game that comes out ends up being a viral social media darling like Valheim that hits at the perfect time, like during a worldwide pandemic type scenario. So it is possible that Enshrouded could be a little bit more in the vein of something like V Rising. You see right here with a player base that's about 3,000 to 4,000 a day and an all-time peak of 150,000, which is still very good. That's a very successful game. And that's important to clarify because a lot of times people will see this metric right here of, oh, only a player base of 3,000 people. Valheim's got 30 or 40,000. That's obviously a dead game that didn't do well, but that's not true because if we look at the revenue data, we can see here that V Rising has about $71 million in gross revenue and an 88% positive view score with 4.6 million units sold. So even though you see that on Steam charts of only 3,000 people, does not mean that it's a dead game or it was unsuccessful for the studio that developed it. And it is really hard for a survival game to hit this peak that Valheim had of 500,000. If we look at a game like Rust, you would think the all-time peak of Rust would be like 1 million players or something, but it's actually 244,000 here as the all-time peak according to the Steam charts, even though Rust is currently at about a player base of 100,000 players, which is completely crazy. That's so good for a game as old as Rust. If we flip on over to New World, you can see that they almost peaked at 1 million players, just over 900,000. But right now their player base is only about 15 to 20,000 people. So only about 1/5, 1/6 as big as Rust, even though Rust is way older than New World. And that means that New World is actually a little bit smaller than Valheim right now, even though Valheim has been out for a couple years at this point, at least in its early access phase. So, okay, we've laid the groundwork of what are some numbers to expect maybe, but I should probably show you a massive outlier, and that is going to be Pow World. Pow World has hit 1.5 million players, almost 1.6. This game is going absolutely viral. It's one of the craziest viral releases I've ever seen. You've got it going extremely mainstream with Asmongold doing videos on it right away, and it's just absolutely popping off right now. So I really don't think this is going to happen. I don't think Enshrouded is going to have 1.5 million players hitting as a peak. I think it's going to be more in that range of something like V Rising, where it's 1 to 150, or best case scenario, something like Valheim, where it hits like 400 or 500. And this is definitely a good sign right here. We can see that Enshrouded is currently in the top 10 of the top wishlisted games on Steam right now. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's in 8th place right now in the top 10 of the top wishlisted games on Steam. But it does feel like, just anecdotally from my experience being in the gaming community and working in social media and everything, it does feel like Enshrouded has a little bit more pre-release hype than Valheim did. Like leading into the early access, it feels like there's more coverage and more hype around Enshrouded, whereas I feel like most people back when Valheim hit early access, it kind of just burst on the scene. I don't remember a whole lot of coverage about Valheim before it came out. Maybe it was there, but I didn't see it being somebody kind of in the gaming community near the extent that I'm seeing Enshrouded. And that kind of ends up coming out in the data right here because you could see the yellow line is going to be Valheim's blow up back in February of 2021, almost 3 years ago at this point. I think I said 2 years earlier, but it's actually almost 3 years. So I apologize for that. But yeah, about 3 years ago, Valheim came out and you can see its peak of 100, whereas right before it came out, the data is showing less than 1. So it had less than 1% of the hype as opposed to when it actually launched live and people could actually play it. That's why I say it seems like there wasn't a whole lot of hype around Valheim before it actually hit early access and people could buy it and play it. If we contrast that to Enshrouded, right now you can see Enshrouded is at a 2 on this graph that includes Valheim. So it's already, before it even came out, it is currently about maybe 15, 20 something percent as popular as Valheim in terms of internet velocity. And I think if I were a developer for Enshrouded, or if I'm a player that's going to be super interested in Enshrouded, I think this is probably a good sign because it's already trending higher than Valheim was before it released. You can see Valheim this whole time was less than 1, but on this same chart, Enshrouded is currently at a 2 a couple days before it releases. Although a couple days before release, Valheim could have been sneaking up there at about a 2 or a 3. It shows an 8 here on this chart. That may have been like the day or two before it came out, which is kind of that time period that Enshrouded is in, but it even had a little bit of a blip back here, which Valheim did not. So I think all of this, obviously none of these metrics are perfect. They're nothing you can take to the bank 100%, but I do think it's overall probably a good sign for Enshrouded. And I'm someone that's been in all sorts of different gaming communities. I've ran all sorts of different YouTube channels for different genres, and I've always been very interested in following data like this. So I guess I can try to predict as best I can, and it might be fun to look back and see if I was crazy or if I was on the right track and all of that. We'll do a follow-up video here after the launch of Enshrouded, and we'll do like a wrap-up review type video on how it's doing. But what is the player base that I think Enshrouded is going to be able to capture? I think it's probably going to land somewhere in between something like V Rising you see right here and Valheim. So probably somewhere between 150,000 of a peak within that first couple days of release, heading into this weekend, which will be the first launch weekend, launching into early access of Enshrouded. I don't know that it will quite hit 500,000 like Valheim did. Valheim went super viral and it was a massive survival game darling. Obviously, if Enshrouded does hit 500,000, that would be insane. But I'm going to go on record with predicting that it probably hits an all-time peak of, I'm going to say about 400,000. I'm going to say it gets a little bit closer to Valheim compared to V Rising just because of some of the data that I'm seeing here on the Google Trends leading up to release. I'm going to go ahead and go on record predicting 400,000 of an all-time peak here for Enshrouded. So approaching Valheim, but not quite getting there. If it does break the peak of Valheim and it gets past that 500,000 point, I will be pleasantly surprised, and it will mean Enshrouded is going to be a very good game. And I definitely plan on going hard in the paint on Enshrouded when it comes out and doing the best I can to cover all sorts of optimal beginner guides and the way to really tech through the game efficiently and all sorts of reviews and any type of content you're going to want around Enshrouded. We're going to do our best to cover it here on the channel for you. And I did also recently talk here on the channel about what is probably my biggest concern heading into Enshrouded as we start to think about some of the different mechanics involved with how the game is going to work. So I will link to that down below in the show notes and the comment section if you would like to hear the thoughts on what I think my biggest concern is about Enshrouded. So remember to subscribe on your way out if you enjoy survival RPG content like covering Enshrouded. And I appreciate you. I will see you soon in the next video. Thanks. Peace.